So, how do fearful or dismissive avoidance men feel love? Well, we're going to talk about this today. I'm really excited to bring back Bev Mitelman to our channel to talk about this. She's an expert at understanding attachment style. And we're going to get into the nitty gritties about insecure and secure attachment style, particularly for those fearful and dismissive avoidant men. So, welcome, Bev.
Thank you so much for having me back again. I love working with your audience and interacting with you folks. I've been on your show a couple of times, and I always go back and read the comments from previous videos, and your audience, they're so engaged and they ask great questions. So thank you for having me back.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here because I am fascinated with attachment style, particularly understanding insecure attachment style, which, as you'll share in a moment, I'm sure, that the avoidance, where there's a fearful and dismissive, and then there's those anxious folks, which I can relate to because I'm a tad bit anxious. I wanted to ask you a question because we talked about this before we recorded, kind of differentiating between being in love, or attachment style or attachment, because there is differences between those. Is that true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Before we jump in, I wanted to share something funny. You actually posted, there was a little video that you posted. It showed up on my feed earlier today, and it said something like, a lot of men, if they're wounded, they will date a woman because they're actually looking for help. Do you remember posting this? So, yes. So they're looking for help. They either want to keep you in a placeholder spot, for companionship and sex, or they're looking for a therapist. When I read that, I said, well, that about sums it up. So thank you for the laugh. You can imagine being a therapist, and also I'm somewhat new, to the dating world. I was married a long time, but I have experienced just that. And so I resonate with your content. It made me laugh. Thank you.
Well, really quickly, I don't want to lose our train of thought, and I have a habit of going down rabbit holes. That video you speak of, I'm really talking about how commonplace it is that in the dating realm, we begin to develop a connection with another human being. And it's almost a replacement for therapy is what I meant. Not that they're intentionally going, I'm going to use this person as a therapist. But I've observed that this becomes a common thread. And I think this is where some people begin to bond with one another on their individual traumas. And while trauma bonding isn't necessarily that, I think it's another form of trauma bonding when two people have their wounds and then they're just supporting one another and they're bonding in that trauma. So.
Right. And that's what makes dating, I guess, at our age, because I'm 48. So, we're in the same age bracket. That's what makes dating at this age so much more challenging, because we do have these accumulated traumas, right? And so when I was dating in my 20s, I didn't really have all that much, or I was unaware of it, right? And as we go through life, we accumulate these traumas, and things become a little bit more difficult. It's more difficult to find those points of connection with people. At the same time, it even becomes more important as we get older, because love and connection is something that we absolutely need for our vitality and our health and our well-being.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go down another rabbit hole before we come back to that being in love question and attachment. So something I've observed, and maybe you might have some thoughts on this, but I've observed, I work with women. I coach women. Something lately is that while women have a propensity, and men as well, to give love from a perspective of doing, what I'm observing is couples aren't really connecting at an emotional level. They're giving love in the form of, I'll do things for you, in that realm. But where I'm noticing a lot of the women I work with, their voice is silent to speaking up in a way that would actually create a deeper connection with another human being. It's just something I don't, there's not a question there, but if you have any thoughts on what I just shared, I think it'd be interesting to explore that for a moment.
I have a lot of thoughts. I
Okay.
think I do. I mean, being able to communicate with someone effectively, there are a lot of layers. And
Yeah.
it starts with first understanding your own mind. And many folks, myself included until a certain point, a few years ago, many years ago, I found this work on attachment styles.
Okay.
And I started to understand my own patterns and my own thoughts and why I was behaving the way that I did. But I invested time to learn and grow. And not everyone actually understands their own patterns, men and women,
Yes.
and they don't understand their own needs. So if I were to say, what's really important to you? What do you need in a relationship? They may struggle to articulate that. And
Yes.
so without understanding yourself, this is what's important to me. How on earth do you communicate that to someone else? And so that's the first basis of where some of the communication goes wrong. Someone gets frustrated because their need isn't being met. They can't necessarily identify all the time what need it is,
Yes.
but they're angry that their partner didn't do the laundry. And this is what we see a lot in couples, is this level of frustration, right? And so again, someone might feel like they're not being heard. So if they ask, for one time, can you help me do the laundry? And the partner doesn't do the laundry, that exacerbates that feeling of I'm not heard. And then we tell ourselves stories, right?
Yeah.
Well, if my partner really loved me, they would do the laundry.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where we create even more suffering for ourselves. So communication.
I'm sorry. Communication.
Communication is so critically important, but you have to first do the work within yourself to understand what you need, what's important, and learn how to communicate that to someone so that it registers with them, it lands well with them, because communication is about comprehension. Right? We so often think it's about talking. It's about comprehension.
Well, I was going to say context makes all the difference too, and how a person perceives. You're right. Like this is the context I'm speaking in, but this is the comprehension of what I'm perceiving from this, and it could be two totally different things. I know you use the laundry analogy, where I've observed particularly, and since you're in the dating realm right now, so you could probably appreciate this. I think one of the biggest challenge in the dating realm, that's why understanding attachment styles is so important from a dating perspective, is there's confusion about how the other person genuinely feels about you and vice versa. Like, how do you genuinely feel versus, the implied feelings that oftentimes happen because of lust or limerence. But there's always this unknowing about how the other person truly feels about you. And then out of fear, well, I don't want to speak up about something because I'm afraid that they're going to change their mind about me. Like, this is where I see a lot of friction, is the fear of actually asking deeper questions, which can build intimacy with a person. Anyway.
Absolutely. So I think that asking questions from the point of curiosity, compassion, seeking clarity, that's all good stuff. It's not blaming, it's not attacking. It's to truly understand, why is your partner saying or doing or not doing something, right?
Yeah.
And this could be very helpful. Now, I tell my clients, because I work with a lot of women as well, you cannot scare off the right person. The right person will say, thank you for asking me that question. I'm happy to answer it.
Yeah.
Now, the wrong person is going to get defensive, or they're going to say, you know what, this is too much. I feel like I'm on trial. They won't take it well. But either way, you have your answer.
I actually, you may not be aware of this, but I have 2 chapters in my book. Really quickly, I'm going to plug my book for a second, everyone. What the heck is self-love anyway? Everybody can see it behind me. Chapter 1 is called Speak Your Truth, Do It with Kindness, coming at from that curious, compassionate place. And chapter 9 is if it's sincere and from the heart, you can't say the wrong thing to the right person.
Yeah.
And that's literally what you've just illustrated right now, but the key point is from the heart, right? You can come from anger and you can come from ego, and that could effectively ruin a good relationship. But when you're coming from the heart, I highly doubt you can affect a really good relationship.
I agree. And I want to say that this is really not gender-based either.
Yes.
I do have clients that I work with specifically who are women who are
Yeah.
asking me to help them to reconnect to their feelings, their emotions, and to be able to communicate what they're feeling. They never learned how to do this. So they don't know how to speak from the heart. Very intelligent women, but they don't know how to communicate in that way. So it's not just men, it's not just women. It's
Yeah.
like sometimes, you grow up in a home
Yeah.
and you learn how to cook.
Yeah.
And some people grow up in a home and they don't learn how to cook.
Yeah.
And some people grow up in a home and they learn how to emotionally regulate and how to communicate and how to do so effectively without being damaging to the other person or hurtful. Yeah. And some people don't learn these skills. And that's what we're up against, right? So, communication is a skill.
Yes.
Right? Anyone can learn that.
All right. So since I took us down some rabbit holes, let's bring it back to being in love, loved, and attachment. So bringing back to that question, what are the differences between those three?
So attachment is an emotional bond.
Okay.
Right? And that happens, like humans are wired for attachment for survival. So when a baby comes into this world, they need to attach to their caregivers for survival. A baby cannot survive without someone taking care of it for many years until they develop independence, right? So it's that emotional bond, and there's a trust that's developed there that you're going to take care of my physical needs, you're going to keep me safe, you're going to protect me, and you're going to, look out for and pay attention, be attuned to my emotional needs. Love, again, is a deep affection for someone or something. So we don't emotionally bond with things, but we can love things, right? People do have deep affection.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Now, but when you throw in love into the context, that's different also. Now, I know why you're bringing this up, because we talk about love, in love, and attachment sort of interchangeably. Like those terms are conflated all the time, but they're not interchangeable and they mean different things. So being in love with someone is always in a romantic context, right? So it means and to be in love with someone takes time. So you do not fall in love with someone after 3 weeks. And people who have been dating for 3 weeks and go, I'm so in love. Yeah. You're not in love. You would be at that point in the development of your relationship in a stage of infatuation or limerence.
Yes.
Right? So you might be highly attracted to this person. But to truly be in love is to actually know someone inside and out, to make that commitment, to work through problems together. That takes a long time, a fairly long time to develop. So yeah, those terms are not interchangeable.
Yeah. So since we are, well, thank you for that explanation, by the way. Since we're talking about how does a fearful or dismissive avoidant, particularly men, because my audience is women, but I mean, I guess this is interchangeable for either gender here, but how does a fearful or dismissive avoidant feel loved? And as we say that, could you just give everyone a little bit of the difference between fearful and dismissive? Because it is confusing, I think.
It is. And, the terms get thrown around a lot. So what I'll do is I'll back up a little bit and talk about attachment styles in general. I know we've talked about this on your program before, but for those that are new, I'd like to just say a couple of words. Specifically, when we're talking about attachment styles, we are talking about a set of learned behavior. We talk about patterns that we develop very early on, generally in our youngest years, depending on the type of relationship and attunement that we had from our caregivers. So when we're talking about attachment style, we are not talking about mental illness. We are not talking about personality disorders. Like I hear a lot of things like psychopath, sociopath, narcissist. Like these are medical terms that are used. This is not what I'm talking about here. Everyone has an attachment style. And again, it's a set of learned behavior. So I just want to be really clear with what it is that we're talking about. Now, you and I have debated statistics, but I generally say about half the population in North America has a secure attachment style. And what that means is they came out of a home where their emotional needs, their physical needs, but also their emotional needs were met most of the time. So their parents were very attuned to them most of the time. And that means that they developed a good sense of self and a level of comfort and trust around other people. So you could imagine when these folks grow up, these little kids grow up, they do very well in the world. They tend to be very comfortable in relationships. They tend to have good, healthy boundaries. Their communication is generally pretty smooth. If they have something to say, they'll say it. So these are the folks who we would say have that secure base, and they do very well in relationships. That's those who come from a secure attachment style. Now, if we look at the other segment of the population, the other 50% or so, they fall into what we call the insecure attachment style. And within the insecure attachment style, there's a spectrum. There's 3 subcategories. One is the dismissive avoidant. Right now, this person is often talked about as being secretive, needing a lot of alone time, overly reliant, afraid to lose their freedom. And they come out of homes most often where their emotional needs were neglected. So these children grew up almost saying, I can't rely on my caregiver to be able to meet my emotional needs. So why bother even asking? I'm just going to do it myself. That's the patterning. So you can see how that causes an issue when we get into adult relationships, right? So I'm going to park that one there. That's the dismissive avoidant. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the anxious, preoccupied person. And again, that is often on social media depicted as a woman, but it is not gender-based. And I'm so happy.
I'm anxious, so I know it.
I'm so happy that you mentioned that you're anxious, preoccupied, or that you're working towards secure attachment, because it is not gender-based. So these folks generally come out of homes where there was some form of abandonment or perceived abandonment by their caregiver. So they didn't get that secure attunement, to their emotional needs. And so when they grow into adults and they get into romantic relationships, oftentimes these are folks who need a lot of reassurance, validation. They're afraid their partner is going to leave them. Their behaviors look very needy and clingy and so forth. And as luck will have it, the dismissive and the anxious often find each other. It's a very common pairing.
Really? What about fearful? I'm
going to talk about that. So we've got the 2 ends, and then we have fearful avoidance in the middle. Now, the fearful avoidant in the middle is the most complex of the attachment styles. And these folks generally come out of homes where there was a significant amount of chaos, often abuse, any form. It could be emotional for sure. It could be physical. It could be verbal.
Verbal.
It could be sexual. But oftentimes there was no stable frame to that home. There was a lot of chaos. And so what happens is that these folks actually attach in a disorganized way. The other name for fearful avoidant is disorganized attachment, which means that they actually display qualities of anxious and avoidant. So they carry more core wounds than any of the other groups. They have stronger triggers, and their behavior can fluctuate. Often,
you said they have stronger triggers. Excuse me.
They do. They have bigger and stronger triggers. Often their feelings are very, very intense, and they often get illustrated or talked about in the sense of the hot and the cold partner. 1 minute they're hot, 1 minute they're cold. That's because 1 minute they're activating and the next minute they're deactivating. And these are opposite coping strategies. So an anxious person will activate to come closer to you and to feel your proximity, whereas a dismissive person will deactivate to take space because they're feeling engulfed. And the poor fearful avoidant in the middle, they do both of those things depending on the context.
So, actually, it's interesting. I didn't understand that. I think today I've got a better understanding of the fearful avoidant than I have in the past. So, all right. Since our title is How Do Fearful and Dismissive Avoidants Feel Loved? Just curious, will a secure person choose? I know I'm going down another rabbit hole before we get to that answer, but isn't it typically the avoidant chooses the anxious and the anxious chooses the avoidant? Like that's the typical scenario?
It's a common scenario. It's not the only scenario. It's a common one. Yeah, it's a common one that we see illustrated in memes, right? Where one partner is running towards their partner, and the other one's running away. But that's not the only pairing. And oftentimes, if you have, for example, someone who's fearful avoidant paired with a secure person, oftentimes they do move more into a secured base.
Okay. So how does that fearful avoidant, that dismissive avoidant feel loved? Because I suspect many people in my audience probably associate with anxious attachment, but I know many, people also, many women associate with fearful or dismissive. But they find themselves in these dynamics with a fearful or dismissive avoidant. How does that person actually feel loved?
It's a great question. So I'm gonna ask you if there's anything that you are absolutely drawn to, that you absolutely love and are fascinated by, but are at the same time really afraid of. Is there something in this world that you're like, wow, that intrigues me, but really scares me as well?
Trying to think. Well, you caught me. This one I wasn't prepared. Well, I'm actually processing. I'm thinking about writing a book.
Okay.
It doesn't scare me to write the book. It's just I just know the effort it takes is overwhelming. So it's not a fear, but it's there's like so many moving parts to putting a book together. Like I know the effort exceeds my passion for it at the moment.
Okay. So there is a little bit of fear there, right?
Yes.
But I'm going to share with you, there is something very distinct in my world, something that I love, but that also scares me. So I'll tell you, it's sharks.
Okay.
So I know it sounds crazy, but sharks fascinate me. I consume all this content about sharks, any documentary, any movie containing sharks. I am fascinated to learn everything about them, and I love them. I think that they're mystical creatures, right?
Yeah.
But they also absolutely terrify me.
Okay.
So the reason that I bring this into conversation is that it's not a bad analogy
Okay.
for someone who is dismissive or fearful avoidant and how they would approach romantic love. So someone who is dismissive avoidant or someone who's fearful avoidant, they do want love and connection in their life.
Yeah.
They do. Most people, unless we're talking about, again, those with mental illness, sociopathy or psychopathy or, narcissists, whatnot, that's not who we're talking about. Most people do want love and connection in their life. So when you start dating someone who is fearful or fearful avoidant or dismissive avoidant, their interest in you is genuine. They're not trying to deceive you. Their interest is absolutely genuine. They want to get to know you. They're oftentimes quite fascinated. These folks are often usually quite charming as well. They're also quite present.
Okay.
An interesting thing about fearful avoidance, because they come from such chaotic homes, they have a high degree of hypervigilance to them. And so
Well, I need to understand something really quickly.
sure.
You said a fearful avoidant has a tendency to be more present,
Yes.
and then they're hyper vigilant. Can you elaborate on what that would look like?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So fearful avoidants actually make terrific partners in the beginning. Uh,
Okay.
until the attachment starts deepening and some of those fears come online. But you could
Okay.
imagine a child who had to learn for their own survival to be able to read the emotions of the people in the house. So
Okay.
if their parents were frightening, right? If they were enduring a level of abuse and they had
Yeah.
to realize, okay, I'm walking on eggshells. I need to keep a low profile today. I need to avoid dad because he's in a mood. So they become extremely good at reading the room,
Okay.
understanding other people's temperaments and emotions. So that's
Okay.
the hypervigilance, and they bring that skill
Yeah.
into adulthood. So I can walk into a room and sort of read people's temperaments real quick.
Yeah.
It's a skill. What that also translates into when you're dating someone is
Yeah.
intense presence. So when I'm with you, or when a fearful avoidant is with you,
Okay.
they are very present. They want to hear what you have to say. They want to hear your stories. They want to understand you because they're trying to discern, can I trust this person?
Okay. Interesting.
So it's quite fun in the beginning, actually.
Okay.
I would say that the same with a dismissive avoidant person. They could be very present. They could be very charming, and it's not a deception. They're not deceiving you in terms
Yeah.
of their level of interest in you. If a dismissive avoidant is interested in you, um, you will know, right?
Okay.
They will spend their time with you, which is something that a dismissive avoidant doesn't do too easily because they're very protective over
Okay.
their time. They'll invite
Okay.
you. They'll invite you into their home, which oftentimes indicates that they feel comfortable with you, right? They don't
Okay.
always do that so quickly. Um,
Okay.
but all of this during the honeymoon phase, when you're just getting to know someone, the attachment styles that we're talking about and the patterning and the fears that come up only
Okay.
happen a little bit later on in the process once
Okay.
that emotional bond deepens with someone.
Okay.
So once, like, let's say you and I are dating, we've had a couple of dates, it's been a couple of months, then we start having some discussions about, let's take this to the next level, let's be exclusive, let's make that commitment. When that emotional bond deepens, that's at the point at which some of the fears start to surface.
Okay.
So, oftentimes, for an anxious partner, for example, when a dismissive partner starts to pull back because they're feeling fearful,
Yes.
it feels like deception. It feels like everything was going fine, and
Yeah.
we were having a great time, and you told me you really liked me, and all of a sudden you don't want to spend time with me. It
Yeah.
feels like a deception. It's not. And you talked about intentionality at the beginning, and this is what I want to say is that it's not dismissive avoidance and fearful avoidance. They're not specifically trying to inflict pain
Yeah.
or intentionally hurt. And
Okay.
I want to make, I'm going to go off on a tangent for a second here.
Okay.
I try not to do this, but
Okay.
I read the comments. I always read the comments from all of our videos together.
Okay.
Again, I thank all of your audience for their thoughtful comments. And one of the things that I did see pop up once or twice is that some people thought that I was making excuses for the dismissive avoidant or the fearful avoidant.
Okay.
And I want to be very clear that if you're in a relationship with anyone and it doesn't feel right to you and it's not meeting your needs, whatever those needs are, I'm never going to suggest that you stay in that relationship, right?
Yeah.
The reason that we talk about attachment styles is that you can recognize in yourself where you sit so that you can make improvements to yourself, and also to also bring solace and peace to someone who is struggling to understand why they might have been, for example, discarded by a dismissive avoidant, because that could be extremely painful. So I talk about this again to say that 99% of the time, people are struggling with their own traumas and their own ways of dealing with things. And it's not something you said. It's not something you did. It's not something that you triggered. So I want folks to understand that I look at knowledge as power and to help everyone heal, right? From any experiences that you have. So I hope that clears things up.
Well, I want to the extent that I know I don't need to defend you, okay? But certainly I want to defend the position is that there's a big difference between creating understanding versus making an excuse. By clarifying all this and understanding why in so many cases, whether it is a man or woman who is afraid or is feeling uncertainty or is confused, in most cases, they're not doing anything intentionally to hurt you. In my videos, I always say most men are good guys. They're just bad daters. And I'm saying that a little tongue in cheek, but the fact is most human beings are rather poor at emotionally regulating themselves, having a good emotional maturity, having good relationship skills. And this is true for men and women alike. This isn't singular. I'm sorry to say to the women that are listening to right now, you guys aren't all great at this either. You're no picnic either. Men are just as bad at this. Women are equally as bad at this as men, but oftentimes this is what happens between genders. They're doing this. So since my audience is women, there's criticism of men. So thank you for allowing me to rant for a second, because I wanted to defend your position.
Thanks.
Because I'm a big believer. That's why I do my channel, is to create understanding. So the fearful and dismissive man, and by the way, I want to take questions in a moment. So I'm going to open it up for questions. What's it going to take for that person to, for lack of better words, tear down their walls?
So I'm gonna mark that. I'm gonna mark that question down, because I want to go back to the shark analogy again. I brought up sharks for a reason, because I think it's a colorful sort of illustration. So if we go back to, I have an intense passion, love, even strong like for sharks. So let's say you say to me, okay, Bev, I know that you love sharks. Let's go on a trip and we can go cage diving.
Okay.
Okay, so at that point in time, no, but okay, this is where I'm headed, right? So at that point in time, I could be like, wow, that would be so amazing. I get to see them up close. I'm going to
Yeah.
love the experience. I'm going to touch a shark. I've always wanted to do this. This is going to be awesome. Then we start future planning. We book the trip. We go buy our clothing and accessories, and we do all of this stuff. And we finally get there, and we get on the boat, and the cage is there. And you go, Bev, go ahead. This is what you've always wanted. Jump in. And at that point in time, when it becomes really real, I go, I can't do it. I almost become paralyzed with fear. I can't do it. And my fear outweighs my feelings, right? So my feelings, my love for sharks, my love for wanting to explore and understand them, all of a sudden my fears pop online because that is really real. Now I have to get in a cage. And so it's actually that level of fear that some people, dismissive and fearful, will experience when jumping off into a relationship. And that's why you sometimes get a very sharp, what they call discard. Everything is going well, and all of a sudden you're about to jump off the boat into the cage, and you're going to, I don't know, move in together.
Yeah.
And I can't do it. I'm out. It's a panic response almost, because the fear becomes too great. So understanding that there is this fear, it does explain a lot. And I hope you found the shark analogy.
No, I love this. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Well, because I was going to say that one of the things that, again, we tend to do, or dismissive avoidance, fearful avoidance, is they try to minimize the impact of the relationship. So they try to detach at the point in which their fears really come online, and they could be afraid of losing their freedom, afraid of losing their independence, having to rely on someone, afraid of vulnerability. There's a strong shame wound for people who have dismissive avoidance style. So if you get too close to me, you might discover that I'm defective, right? So that's why all of these things become very scary for them.
Let me ask you a question. And this is just something I've observed. So this is anecdotal. I've observed that many people who are avoidants, and I'll just lump them two together in the dismissive or the fearful, tend to be less expressive or emotionally expressive in a relationship. Is there any studies or anything that backs up that perception that I have? And again, this is anecdotal from my part. They're not overly verbally expressive to their partner from an affectionate perspective. I mean, and again, this is just an observation, so I can't say it I've done a study at this, but is there any potential truth to what I've just said?
Well, there is, and it's somewhat easy to understand if we go back to the very young child who is not having their emotional needs met. They're not learning attunement, so they're also not learning good communication skills, right? So we go back to, they didn't learn how to cook, right? They didn't learn, and so what they do is they typically disconnect from their emotions, which makes it even more difficult for them to understand, okay, what am I actually feeling right now? And how do I put that into words? And how do I say it in a way that it'll actually land with someone else? So these skills weren't modeled for them.
Okay.
They can learn these skills. They certainly can, right?
Yeah.
And again, one of the things I wanted to talk about is that when people, when that emotional bond deepens and things become really real, like I'm about to jump into that cage and swim with the sharks, one of the things that people do to preserve themselves is they start to distance. They start to minimize the importance of the relationship, and they tend to use certain strategies like flaw finding. And one of the funniest shows ever is Seinfeld. I'm sure you've seen Seinfeld episodes. So do you remember there's a whole running joke throughout the entire series of Jerry and his dating shenanigans.
Sure,
right?
sure, sure.
So,
Yeah.
what was after
I
every
know him by heart. I know him by
okay.
heart.
So after every episode, Jerry would say, "Oh, she's not for me. Her hands are too big."
Yes, man hand. She's a close talker. She's a far talker. She eats her peas with her fork. She walks around naked. I mean, like the list goes on and on. He found a flaw.
That's right. And it's only funny because it's absolutely true. So, what Jerry's actually doing is he really doesn't want to get too emotionally close to anyone. If you watch his behavior, he's quite avoidant. He doesn't like conflict. He doesn't talk about his emotions. He's just there to be, the entertainment. He's always on a surface level, right? He's also, you can tell, quite anxious. He's got a low level anxiety to him. He's always a little bit riled up. So it's easy to see that he's this type of avoidant. And he goes out on a date with good intentions, and there's always something wrong with her.
Yeah. I've looked at that show, and I think Jerry is the anxious one. Probably George is the fearful avoidant. Elaine is the dismissive avoidant, and Kramer is the secure, because Kramer always had a good time. I'm making that up, by the way.
Kramer's personality is funny, but he had no problem attaching to other people.
Yes, exactly. He was the most. He attached easily. But all right, we still have to answer the question: how does that fearful and dismissive person feel loved?
Okay.
Like, how do they feel it?
They feel it in the same way that every other human feels it, by feeling like they are understood.
Okay.
And this is the problem, in that, as you said earlier, we don't ask enough questions from a place of compassion, right?
Okay.
I want to understand. So if I know that my partner needs a little bit of space when we've had an argument, I won't chase after him. I will give him his space. And that's how I'm going to show that I respect and love you. And I'm also going to honor myself, because I'm going to say, listen, I would like to talk about this tonight before we go to sleep. Doesn't have to be exactly now, but I don't want to go to sleep with a heavy heart. So, in the next couple hours, let me know when you're ready. So I'm honoring myself. I'm not saying I'm not going to bring it up, but I'm also not pushing too hard. Right?
Got it.
So when you chase after someone, they, especially if they're dismissive or fearful avoidant, they will run in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
That's just what they will do, because they're trying to put space, and they're not trying to put space to harm you. They're trying to put space so that they can figure out their own emotions, what they want to say. They oftentimes really don't like conflict, because it brings up, childhood, experiences that obviously they still carry wounds. And so, how do you love someone who is dismissive avoidant or fearful avoidant? You approach them, I would say, with compassionate inquiry.
Okay. Understanding and you said understanding, but compassionate inquiry.
Yeah, but I would extend that to almost anyone, because as we said earlier in our discussion, at our age, we've all, regardless of our attachment style, we've all suffered traumas.
Yes.
We all have things that we carry around. So compassionate inquiry when you're meeting someone is, I think, is a good approach for everyone. And, once you understand, okay, by the way, observation is really one of the most important things you can do as well. So someone can tell you, I mean, I've had many people on first dates say, I'm emotionally stable. And then I get to know them and I can see they're not entirely so stable, right? Their behavior would indicate otherwise. They're not.
By the way, if someone ever said that to me, I'm going to run the other way, because if you don't own your shit, then I'm not interested. Bev, I want to take questions. Okay. So,
sure.
Hey, everyone, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation so far. We're going to go for about another 15 minutes. Now it's time for Q&A. So if you have a question for Bev or myself, write the word question in the chat box and then post the question thereafter. or you can purchase a super sticker, super chat. There's a little dollar sign in the chat box. All the monies from the super sticker, super chat goes to a scholarship fund in the name of my son, Connor Asley. That's a picture of him right there with his brother, Colin. It's my son who passed away almost 6 years ago. In his honor, we donate to causes like the Hoffman Process, Insight Institutes, and scholarships to coaching as well. I'd like to get $50 before the end of the evening. So we appreciate the love. We have our first question that came in from Annika. I'll read it out loud, Bev. When dating, how do we determine someone's attachment style? How do we inspire a DA or an FA to be more secure?
Okay. Hi, Annika. So nice to meet you. Thank you for your question. So those are two separate questions. Determining someone's attachment style is generally best done by observing their behavior.
Okay.
So people have a very hard time disguising their actual patterns, unless, again, we're talking about folks who are like sociopathic or psychopath. That's not who we're talking about. We're talking about the general population. So if you give it enough time, 4 to 6 weeks, you will see patterns that emerge. And there are often clues in terms of the language that people use. I will often ask a question like, tell me about your mother. That is one of the most revealing questions that you can ask on a first date, because how they describe their childhood and their relationship to their own mother can tell you a whole lot. The second question I will ask is, tell me about your ex.
Yeah.
Right? So, which again, what you're looking for is a pattern in how their accountability and what they saw is going well or not going well. But observation is your best friend here. So, someone who is dismissive avoidant will not want to spend as much time with you as someone who is anxious preoccupied. Someone who's anxious preoccupied will want to establish the relationship really quickly and sort of lock you down and, we're in a relationship and let's do this. And oftentimes it moves at lightning speed. Yeah. That's, if someone's moving something at lightning speed, that should be a red flag. There could be other reasons for that. But language is also super important. So you can tell when people use certain phrases like, I've been feeling really sad and lonely. Those are generally emotional patterns of an anxious preoccupied. Whereas if someone says, I've been feeling overwhelmed and frustrated and a little angry, those are generally emotional patterns of a fearful avoidance. And so you get to know this stuff over time. And you certainly...
So how do you turn that into secure, to kind of do the second question?
Yeah, I'm going to sort of, Annika, you're not going to like my answer, because you can encourage someone to explore their own emotional patterns and to invest in personal growth, but there's no changing someone else. So you cannot move someone else from an FA to secure. If they want to change, they will do that. Now, you can certainly share with someone that, for example, you're on your own journey and that you've learned so much about yourself. And this is the work that we do at Securely Loved. I work with a number of practitioners at securelylove.com, and we work specifically on reprogramming core wounds so that you can move towards a more secure attachment style. And it really, in a couple of months, you can actually see beautiful results in your thought patterns and your emotional patterns. And it's quite fascinating because these programs sit at the subconscious level. So Annika, unfortunately, you can encourage someone to better themselves, but it's not your job and it's not your place as their partner to move them from one to another, from, let's say, dismissive to secure.
Yeah. By the way, really quickly, everybody, Bev just shared with her website, Securely Loved. There'll be a link below in the show notes and in the first comment. If you want to connect with her, if you want to check out her work, go to securelylove.com, but I'll be posting the link there. All right, we've got one more question that came in from Cheryl, who happens to be a personal friend of mine. So her question is, hey, Jonathan and Bev, how do you break it off with a fearful avoidant that you still care about in a respectful way once you know that it's not working out without making them more fearful? Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how to do that. So can you let's tell Cheryl how to go about doing that.
Yeah, Cheryl, that's a great question. And first of all, the fact that you are concerned about the impact of your actions on someone else generally speaks to your kind nature. So thank you for that. Kindness, I think, is always important in relationships. Fearful avoidants carry a strong core wound of I will be betrayed, or someone is going to lie to me, I will be used. So they generally value honesty and they value depth of conversation because they really do want to get to know you. So if you are dating someone who's fearful avoidance and you know it's not working out, have a straight up conversation with them, right? And the way that you frame it is important. So what I'm saying is don't ghost this person. If you ghost them, it will really trigger their betrayal wound. That's the worst thing that you can do. But you can sit down and say, I really love these qualities about you, but I'm noticing that we're not so compatible in these other areas. And maybe you would still want to be friends, or, if you are genuinely interested in this person. So I would take a direct, honest approach. Expect that the fearful avoidant will probably get a little bruised, and that's okay. A little bruised is okay. They may take a little space from you, but once they realize that you were being honest, they'll come back to you.
We said this earlier in the broadcast, learning how to speak from the heart, and coming from that sincere place. It's such an invitation for everyone to really learn how to communicate from here instead of here, because it takes practice to come really centered with your heart and what you're feeling. But as we said earlier, I think when you speak sincerely from the heart, it can certainly cause a person to feel some pain. But hopefully not enough to where they want to just abandon you because of that pain. They want to still stay at least in a cordial type of way, especially when you're ending a relationship, because that's a sign of emotional maturity in my book anyway.
100%. So, again, when you're dealing with someone that has a core wound of I will be betrayed or I will be used, or and you're aware of that. So the biggest gift you can do is to give them honesty, right? Now, again, the way that you phrase it with kindness and with love is important. And I do believe that, the other thing you can do is explain. I think that a lot of times we sort of say, I don't think this is a match. It's not working out.
It's not you, it's me.
Yeah, that's it. So if you use phrases like that, it's not gonna go well, because the fearful avoidant knows that you're lying to them, right? That you're feeding them garbage, right? It's not you, it's me, it's that. But like when I talk about honesty and depth of conversation, say to them, I don't think our lifestyles are compatible. I like doing this and you like doing this, and I just don't see it working out. And that is fair. Right? So that's much more palpable and it's easier to digest.
But if you love me, Bev, you will change.
No, you see, that's the thing, is that, it
By the way,
depends.
I was joking, right?
I do. But so many people think that, that they're going to change their partner, and no, you're not. So if you
there's this, I'm sorry. There's kind of this running narrative. I apologize for interrupting. If you love me, you will change. Like, in other words, you're going to do something different or want something different. And I think this is where unhealthy love starts to get birthed. When you tell someone, if you love me, you would do what I want. And a lot of people operate from that vantage point, at least what I've observed anyway.
That is,
But
in
it's
my,
fair to have differences, is my point. It's very fair. And by the way, most people are different, they're not identical with one another.
uh, and that's what makes coupling so beautiful. Like, we
Yeah.
actually, most of the time, we're actually attracted in our from a very primitive standpoint to people who are opposite to us, right? That exhibit opposite traits, and that's a beautiful thing. So, asking someone to change is a deep form of criticism.
Yeah.
And that's not going to land well with most people. Just think about, how that would land if someone said that to you,
Well,
right?
I
So,
think there's this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Finish that thought.
well, again, I think what the healthy thing to do is to say, listen, this is what I need, right? I need a certain level of, let's say, physical affection to feel connected to you. If your partner, let's say, is not very physical, and they could have a completely different love language. And if they say to you, well, I'm not really comfortable with holding your hand when we go into the shopping center, it's a very, nondescript example, then you have to decide, can you live with that? Or is it a deal breaker?
Yeah.
Right? But holding on to hope that they are going to change their mind about that, that's not healthy.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take one more question before we wrap up. So we're going to do this quickly. Hi, Bev. I'm very into. Oh, by the way, it's Mystic Tarot Cafe, tea time for Lola. I want to say that entire name out. Bev, I'm very independent from a young age, yet I'm nervous about driving. I learned as an adult, but this is a big barrier. Do attachment styles show up or change depending? Well, we talked about, can you change it? You remember you and I talked about this beforehand? We talked about, can an attachment style change? I think that's where she's going with this.
Okay, I'm just reading the question. I learned as an adult, but this is a big barrier. Do attachment styles show up or change? Okay, so attachment styles are generally formed very early on, as we talked about. But as we go through life and we experience different traumas, that absolutely can imprint on us, right?
Okay.
So the fact that you are nervous about driving wouldn't necessarily be connected to attachment styles, but it would be connected to what is going on inside of you in terms of trauma that you have experienced. So I don't know if, for example, you were in a car accident or you witnessed a car accident or something of that regard that imprinted on you that this was scary or unsafe. But I can tell you, for example, that people who have driven all of their lives, suddenly who get into a car accident and then they try to drive again and they can't. The fear overtakes them. This is a trauma response. So, and again, trauma is not about what's happened out there. Trauma is about how you internalized it. Right. And what happened inside of you, how you internalized it from that external event. So the fact that you're having difficulty driving, I mean, I'd be happy to work with you. There's something there. There's something that is scaring you. And I'm sure we could figure that out. But it's not really necessarily tied to attachment styles.
Okay. By the way, for the record, as I've gotten older, I don't like driving. I'm like, I've driven like 1,000,000 miles in my life. And I don't know if that's the exact number, but all of a sudden I'm like, I can't wait for self-driving cars. I mean, like literally I just walk in and it just goes, I mean, like without any glitches to it. Like I can't wait for that day. But certainly, I say this because driving at night is really the bigger issue. It's as you age, when you have to use these, it's just not as easy. So I can relate to a little bit what she shared. Well, Bev, this was a fun conversation, learning about fearful, dismissive, and all the nuances that go into how we feel loved, being in love, attachment, all that stuff. We went down some really fun rabbit holes. Can you share with everyone again how they can connect with you?
Thank you. I absolutely can. So my company is called Securely Loved. So securelyloved.com. We are a group of practitioners. We're all certified attachment practitioners. And it's a great group. I know you're just seeing my face here, but there's a whole team of people who work just in the field of attachment theory, and they're fantastic. You can go to our website and you can book a 20-minute free consult, meet any one of the practitioners that you want. And then, if you want to work with us, we would be happy to help you on your journey towards secure attachment.
Oh, and by the way, really quickly, someone posted this. Can they take the attachment test on your site?
They can. Okay. So there is a quiz, which is interesting because someone asked earlier, how can you tell, the attachment style? So there is a quiz that will give you a general, quick insight into your own attachment style. So if you go to securelyloved.com, you will see the attachment quiz. It takes 5 to 10 minutes and it'll tell you where you fall. And I think that is a really good step in terms of awareness of your own attachment style. And if you are dating someone and you want to have a little fun with them, you can say, hey babe, here's a little quiz I'd like you to take if you're unsure where they fall. I've done that before. I've said, hey, this is a fun thing to do.
By the way, I did the test the other day after you sent me to it. Oh. And I was majority secured, but my defaults weren't as, my anxious wasn't over the line of secure. I was more secure this time than previously. So I've grown a little bit.
I know you've done a lot of work. I know that you have. And again, it's a journey, right? And it's a continuum. So when we talk about like dismissive avoidant and anxious preoccupied, we're sort of talking about the extremes, but most people fall somewhere in the middle where they are primarily secure or primarily, let's say, dismissive avoidant, but then leaning a little bit anxious. So nobody fits into one box precisely.
Yeah.
Right. Because and it also is a continuum that it evolves, right? Just like someone asked earlier, can a different trauma or something you've experienced, can that influence your attachment style? It sure can.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, I want to reach in and give you a big hug of appreciation, Bev. Everyone check out her website listed below at Securely Loved. We'll bring Bev back in a few months and talk about this in a little bit. We'll get a little more granular as we did tonight. So everyone, I want to thank Callie and Catherine and Sally and Mystic Tarot Card and Debbie and Powerachi and Annika and everyone who donated tonight. Lighthouse, Mary Ann, Margaret, everyone, thanks so much for being on. Bev, thanks again. Wishing everyone a super duper wonderful, fantastic evening. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.